heard me speak on these issues before, which I do a lot, will know that I am a solicitor specialising in employment law. I'm not currently practising, but I spent 13 years doing employment and particularly discrimination law work, small amount for small employers, but predominantly for employees. I have seen a lot of settlement agreements, really a lot of settlement agreements. Pretty much every client I ever had ended up with a settlement agreement. And it is extremely unusual for them not to contain some form of NDA. And the typical sort of wording that we would be talking about here is that you cannot discuss the terms of the agreement nor the circumstances surrounding the termination of your employment. There are so many difficulties with this, quite hard to unpack in 7 minutes, but one of the difficulties with it is that some of the people who put forward these agreements are not solicitors. So a lot of businesses will have an HR advisor who is not regulated by the Solicitors Regulation Authority, and many of them are very good people doing a very good job providing affordable advice to businesses. This is not to universally condemn HR consultants, but the reality is that they will have at some point been given a precedent settlement agreement by a solicitor, but we might be talking 20 years ago, and they still contain NDAs. So there is really, really widespread use of these being put forward. And when I, as a solicitor, would go back and say, but if my clients can't say anything about the circumstances concerning the termination of their employment, like, what are they supposed to say to their new employer when they try to get a new job? Some of them would agree to negotiate some sort of vague wording around, left by mutual agreement so that they could at least say that. And some of them would just flat out say there's money on the table, your client can either take it or they can leave it. At which point your client can either take it or leave it. But they're facing significant legal bills, and although hypothetically the employment tribunals were designed to enable you to represent yourself, the reality is if you've got a complex discrimination claim, you may have a mental health problem, either that your claim related to in the first place or you've developed one because you've been treated so badly in your employment. You cannot face the prospect of an unrepresented employment tribunal claim. So it's all well and good that the Solicitors Regulation Authority has said that people should not be putting forward these clauses, but they are still in extremely widespread circulation. The other flip side of this is that in order to be persuaded to sign a settlement agreement, there is a requirement that your employer pays for you to have some legal advice. The standard legal advice offer is somewhere between £250 and £500, but for low-paid people it is still our standard £250. Now, the reality of the legal market is that any specialist employment lawyer is not going to go through, explain a potentially 20-page legal document to you, send you follow-up written advice, renegotiate the terms for you, and do all of that work for £250. So people who are on low pay have two choices. They can either go to a lawyer who will take them through perhaps the terms of that agreement for the £250, explain what they mean, but then they've run out of money, so that's the end of it. They're not renegotiated at all, they just sign what is put in front of them. Or, what often happens is that if you're a senior exec or whoever, you can afford the advice. That means that you do get it fully explained and totally renegotiated for you, so it is actually compliant at the end of it. And if you've got a solicitor like me working against a solicitor on the other side who's put forward something that doesn't meet the SRA guidelines, then we just say, we're not signing that, and you know it's not compliant, you're in breach of your professional obligations, now get this off the table. And they do, absolutely swiftly. But actually, if you've got £250, you earn 20 grand a year, there's no way you are paying for that level of top-up legal advice. That is not happening for you at all whatsoever. What you will find is that most good solicitors will explain that they can't do it for the money, explain how much it will cost you to have it done properly. You won't be able to afford it, and at best you will end up with some really, really shoddy solicitor who's prepared to sign off pretty much anything, isn't necessarily a specialist employment lawyer, and is going to just bluntly leave you completely stuck. And so you're kind of this payment structure is enriching for non-compliant solicitors at best. There is, in theory, legal aid for people who are on very, very low wages or in receipt of certain benefits and who have equality claims. But actually the reality is that's been paid at such a low rate for such a long time that there are almost no providers at all whatsoever. And unless we significantly increase the hourly rate that we pay to providers, providers will simply continue to hand back their contracts, which is what's happened in the majority of places. It is extremely difficult to actually access this advice unless you are a trade union member. There are still lots and lots of employers who regard all of this stuff as just priced in. So I have had clients who have come to me and said, oh yeah, so it's absolutely notorious, the chief exec is a complete perv, everyone in the organisation knows it, but the board don't care. They can give these women 20 grand to go away, they sign an NDA, and that's the end of that. And we've watched the chief exec do this time after time after time. But it's just the cost of doing business. He is regarded as like the superstar who brings home the bacon, and so no one cares. And that's the fundamentals of many UK employers. And I suspect if you looked at places like UK Fast, where the chief exec subsequently got done for raping his staff, that's been going on for years. He didn't just wake up one morning and do that to one woman. He was notorious in Manchester. Lots of people knew what was going on here. It happens across different organisations. There's no one specific sector. The media tends to... Of course.
My honourable friend is making an absolutely fantastic speech, and her experience is spot on. Would she agree with me, though, that this culture of fear that is being created, I've seen it at the Welsh Rugby Union, thankfully it no longer exists, women so scared to speak out, and yet that culture of fear is being perpetuated everywhere by the use of NDAs?
Absolutely, that culture is totally everywhere, and it's across sectors. There's no one specific one that if you just sorted it out, the others would be all right. There's also an absolute phenomena that there are organisations out there that say publicly they don't use NDAs. Well, I've seen their settlement agreements, and I can tell you they absolutely do. That is not at all unusual. So, in kind of summary, what I'd say here is that we've got a really systemic problem that is being used to cover up employment rights abuses across the board. We really do need to legislate for this. We really do need standard wording that people can't derogate from, whether they're lawyers or HR consultants or business owners. There are lots of good employers out there. I don't want to see them, I don't want anyone to think that I think that all employers are terrible. I really, really don't. There are a lot of people busting a gut to do the right thing by their employees. But we have to stop this.
Yeah.